Have you ever been stuck in a conversation that feels strangely exhausting? Someone asks, "So, how's your day going?" You answer politely. They say, "Good, good." Then there's that awkward pause, so someone fills it with another question. Crazy weather lately, right? And suddenly your brain feels like it's slowly powering down. Not because the person is rude, not because the topic is offensive, but because the conversation itself feels draining. Meanwhile, other people seem to glide through these moments effortlessly, chatting about weekend plans, laughing about traffic, filling silence with light, easy talk. And if you're someone who secretly hates small talk, you might have wondered something uncomfortable. Is something wrong with me? Are you socially awkward, too serious, too introverted, or maybe a little arrogant? But here's the twist most people miss. For many people, the problem with small talk isn't arrogance, it's cognitive overload. And once you understand what's actually happening in your brain during small talk, the whole experience starts to make a lot more sense. Because the truth is, people who struggle with small talk aren't always trying to avoid people. Sometimes they're trying to avoid mental noise. And there's an important difference. Let's start with something that doesn't get talked about enough. Small talk is actually a surprisingly complex mental task. On the surface, it looks simple. But under the hood, your brain is juggling a lot at once. You're monitoring tone, reading facial expressions, tracking social cues, choosing safe topics, filtering your responses so you don't say something awkward, timing your reactions so the conversation flows naturally. That's a lot of processing. For some people, this happens automatically. But for others, especially people who are more sensitive to social signals or more mentally analytical, this process takes significant cognitive energy. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as cognitive load. Cognitive load is basically how much mental bandwidth a task requires, and small talk can create a surprisingly high load because the conversation has very little informational payoff. In other words, your brain is doing a lot of work for very little meaning. Imagine running multiple background apps on your phone. Your battery drains faster. Not because the apps are important, but because they're constantly running. Small talk can feel like that. A bunch of social background processes happening simultaneously. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. For many people who dislike small talk, the issue isn't just cognitive load, it's overstimulation. Some people have nervous systems that are more reactive to social environments. More voices, more eye contact, more unpredictable interactions. Each new input adds to the brain's processing demand. And when that demand piles up, the brain starts looking for efficiency. It wants fewer signals, clearer information, more meaningful exchanges. Which is why many small talk-averse people often prefer conversations that go deeper faster. Not because they think they're above casual conversation, but because deeper conversation actually reduces cognitive noise. When a topic becomes meaningful, structured, or emotionally real, the brain can focus. Instead of juggling 10 social signals, it can follow one clear thread. But here's where people often misunderstand this behavior. They assume that someone who dislikes small talk must be antisocial, or cold, or maybe even a little judgmental. But the same behavior can come from very different motivations. So let's pause here, because this is where things get more nuanced. There are actually 3 very different reasons someone might dislike small talk, and they don't mean the same thing psychologically. First, there's the preference type. These are people who simply enjoy meaningful conversation more than surface-level chatting. They might still tolerate small talk when necessary, but their energy rises when discussions move into ideas, experiences, emotions, or curiosity. For them, small talk isn't painful, it's just boring. Their brain naturally seeks depth. Second, there's the overstimulated processor. These people often have highly active pattern detection systems. They're constantly reading the room, analyzing tone, predicting reactions, which means social environments can become mentally loud very quickly. Small talk, in this case, becomes draining not because it's shallow, but because it requires constant social monitoring without delivering meaningful content. Their brain is working hard without feeling rewarded. And then there's the third type, the protective avoider. And this is where the story changes. For some people, avoiding small talk isn't about depth or cognitive load. It's about emotional protection. Small talk can feel unpredictable, unscripted, socially risky. So the brain develops a quiet strategy. Avoid the interaction entirely, or jump straight to structured topics where you feel more in control. In this case, the dislike of small talk may actually be a form of social self-protection. But here's where things get interesting again. Because the same outward behavior, disliking small talk, can come from all three of these places: preference, overstimulation, or protection. And if we're being honest, many people are actually a blend of all three. But this is also the moment where we need to slow down a bit, because the internet loves to romanticize this trait. You've probably seen posts that say things like, "People who hate small talk are deeper thinkers," or "Small talk is for shallow minds." But that framing misses something important. Small talk actually serves a very real social purpose. It's not just meaningless noise, it's a social warm-up. Think of it like stretching before exercise. You wouldn't immediately start sprinting at full speed. Your body needs a transition. Human relationships work the same way. Small talk allows people to test safety, gauge personality, establish tone. It's a low-risk entry point into social connection, and skipping that step entirely can sometimes create its own problems. Because while deep conversations build closeness, small talk builds access. It opens doors. It lowers social friction. It signals friendliness, which means completely rejecting small talk can sometimes unintentionally limit opportunities for connection. But here's the key distinction. Disliking small talk doesn't mean you're bad at relationships. It simply means your brain prefers different types of interaction. The real question isn't whether you enjoy small talk. The real question is whether your relationship with it is flexible. Because when a preference becomes rigid, it can quietly turn into armor. For example, if someone avoids small talk because they genuinely prefer deeper conversations, that's a healthy preference. But if someone avoids small talk because it triggers anxiety, embarrassment, or fear of awkwardness, then the behavior may actually be reinforcing a pattern of avoidance. And avoidance has a strange psychological side effect. It makes the thing we avoid feel even more uncomfortable over time. But let's be clear. You don't need to force yourself to become a small talk enthusiast. You don't have to suddenly love discussing the weather or weekend plans. What matters more is understanding why your brain reacts the way it does. Because once you understand the pattern, you gain something powerful. Choice. You can choose when to engage lightly, when to go deeper, when to conserve your energy, and when to step away. That's very different from feeling trapped in a social pattern you don't understand. And remember the moment we started with? That awkward conversation about the weather. The one that made your brain feel like it was slowly shutting down. Here's the interesting part. For some people, that moment is just a casual interaction. For others, it's a full sensory and cognitive juggling act. Neither reaction is wrong. They're just different nervous system responses to the same situation. And once you see that difference clearly, something important happens. You stop judging yourself for the way your brain works, but you also stop using that difference as a reason to stay stuck. Because the goal isn't to become someone else. The goal is to understand your patterns well enough that you can choose them. Sometimes you'll tolerate small talk because it opens doors. Sometimes you'll steer conversations toward depth because that's where you thrive. And sometimes you'll simply step away and recharge. None of that makes you broken. It just means your mind processes social interaction a little differently. And the moment you understand that difference, you stop fighting your nature and start working with it. Do you feel more drained by the shallowness of small talk or by the mental effort it takes to navigate it? If this video helped you understand your own social patterns a little better, consider subscribing to Psychology Decoded. We explore the hidden psychology behind everyday behaviors so you can understand yourself and other people more clearly.